Welcome to The Darkest Files. Most people look at the wilderness and see beauty. We look at it and see a calculator. Today we perform a master audit on 4 files where the laws of physics didn't just bend, they broke. We call it the absolute zero of logic. First, the 90 digital screams in the Panama jungle. Then, the surgical decapitations in the Superstition Mountains. We move to the 19 Hertz madness of the Ural peaks. And finally, the case of the man who melted out of his clothes at Crater Lake. 4 landscapes. 4 anomalies. One singular truth. The mountain is not your friend. It is an auditor, and today we are auditing the auditor. Prepare your mind for the field logic. This is a 20-minute descent into the void.
Chapter 1. The Boundary of Silence. There is a hidden line in the wilderness that should never be crossed. A point where classical physics begins to blur and the absolute zero of logic takes over. In April 2014, 2 young women, Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froome, stepped into the lush green canopy of Panama's El Pianista Trail. They were looking for a paradise, but they found a scent void. A place where the forest doesn't just watch, it calculates your end. Today we perform a forensic audit on the 90 digital screams captured in the dark. Chapter 2. The Signal Ghosting Enigma. On April 1st at 4:39 p.m, the first emergency call was placed. It failed. Over the next 10 days, 77 emergency attempts were logged on their iPhones. This is what we call signal ghosting. It is a phenomenon where the mineral-rich mountains and dense foliage act as a signal thief, swallowing the last cries for help. Even with a cell tower just a few miles away, the acoustic shadow of the jungle created a silent prison. We analyze the exact timestamps of every call, revealing a pattern of survival that defies human endurance. Chapter 3. The 90 Digital Screams. On the 8th night, in total darkness, a camera shutter began to fire. 90 photos were taken between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. at 0.1 second intervals. This was not a photo shoot, it was a digital scream. The EXIF data shows an optical sensor trying to capture something in the shadows. We analysed the 417th frame anomaly, a silhouette that suggests they weren't alone. Was the flash a tool for navigation or a desperate attempt to repel a predator that doesn't follow the laws of biology? These photos are the only surviving witnesses to the absolute zero of logic. So 9 Serre 11. Chapter 4. Molecular termination. Months later, the remains were found, but the forensic audit revealed a biological impossibility. Chris's pelvic bone was found completely bleached, a white, sterile colour that shouldn't exist in a damp, bacteria-rich jungle. This is molecular termination, a process where the mountain seems to fast-forward time itself, leaving evidence that defies the standard rate of decomposition. Why did one bone turn to porcelain while others remained organic? The data is impossible, yet the evidence remains. Tatashinstam 11 Saus 12. Chapter 5. The mountain holds the page. Nature does not hunt, it simply outlasts. Chris and Lisanne became part of the landscape they tried to conquer. The 90 flashes never lit the path home, and the 77 calls never pierced the mountain's veil. The wilderness is always listening, but it never answers. We leave you with the final audit. The forest is not a place you visit, it is a force that decides if you stay. Stay safe. Stay found. This is the Darkest Files TV.
East of Phoenix, Arizona, lies a jagged volcanic fortress known as the Superstition Mountains. To the casual hiker, it is a beautiful, albeit dangerous park. But to those who study the absolute zero of logic, it is something else entirely. It is a geological machine designed to erase human presence. The Apache called this place the home of the Thunder God, a sacred and forbidden zone where the veil between worlds is thin. They warned that those who entered with greed in their hearts would never return. In the late 19th century, a German immigrant named Jacob Waltz supposedly found a gold mine of unimaginable wealth, the Lost Dutchman's gold. Since then, thousands have pursued this glittery bait, only to be swallowed by the silent canyons. But at the Darkest Files TV, we don't care about the gold. We care about the forensic audit of the disappearances. Why do experienced survivalists vanish in seconds? Why is the silence here described as predatory? Today we peel back the layers of the superstitions to find a truth more terrifying than any ghost story. We are looking for the fear frequency. Let's perform a forensic audit on the case of Adolf Ruth. In 1931, Ruth entered the mountains with a map to the Lost Dutchman's mine. He was an experienced explorer. He never came out. 6 months later, his skull was found. It was located miles away from his torso. But the mountain data reveals a terrifying detail. The separation of the head was not the work of coyotes or mountain lions. Forensic pathology suggested a clean separation, almost as if the laws of biology had been suspended. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle. It was as if he had simply sat down and allowed the mountain to take him.
Brother, imagine a mountain so sharp and a silence so heavy that it acts like a phantom razor. It's not a murderer in the bushes. It's the environment itself deciding that your physical form is no longer required. The mountain doesn't just kill, it disassembles you to fit into its own dark archive.
We see this pattern again and again. James Kidd, 1949. The three hikers in 2010. Their gear is found neatly stacked, their shoes lined up, but their bodies are scattered in a way that defies the physics of a struggle. This is biomechanical erasure. When the mountain decides you are a trespasser, it begins to undo the very logic of your existence. Why do people lose their minds in these canyons? The answer lies in the wind and the rock. The Superstition Mountains are composed of narrow vertical slot canyons that act as natural organ pipes. When the desert wind hits these structures at specific velocities, it generates infrasound, specifically the 19 Hz frequency. Human hearing starts at 24 Hz. We cannot hear 19 Hz, but our bodies feel it. This is the fear frequency.
Think of it like this. Your eyeballs and your inner ear have a natural vibration. When the mountain sings at 19 Hz, it's like a giant invisible hand shaking your brain. It creates a ghost in the machine. You see shadows that aren't there. You feel a hand on your shoulder when you're alone. Your heart races for no reason. The mountain is literally hacking your nervous system.
Forensic audio audits of the canyons reveal that during the hours when most disappearances occur, the infrasound levels spike. This causes sudden panic. Hikers, overwhelmed by a feeling of cosmic dread, run blindly. They run off cliffs. They run into caves. They run until their hearts fail. They aren't running from a monster. They are running from a vibration that is telling their brain, death is here. But the physics fail doesn't stop with sound. The superstitions are a massive collection of volcanic rock with high mineral content, creating localized magnetic anomalies. This is where we encounter the Oz factor. Survivors describe a moment where the world goes absolute zero. The wind stops, the insects go silent, even the smell of the desert disappears. This is molecular termination, a sensory void where your brain loses its connection to reality. Your GPS begins to ghost, spinning wildly or showing you are miles away from your actual coordinates. In this digital void, the human hypothalamus begins to malfunction. We see evidence of paradoxical undressing. Victims, even in the freezing desert night, suddenly feel like they are burning alive. They tear off their clothes, seeking relief from a heat that isn't there. This is the mountain's final trick. It freezes you while making you think you are on fire. It is the ultimate failure of biological logic. The Superstition Mountains are not evil. Evil implies a human emotion. The mountain is indifferent. It is a calculating force that uses sound, magnetism, and psychology to maintain its privacy. The lost Dutchman's gold was never the real treasure. The treasure was the silence, and the mountain will protect that silence at any cost. Every year, thousands enter, most return. But for those few who hit the absolute zero of logic, the woods go completely silent. And in that silence, they vanish. We don't ask you to believe in ghosts. We ask you to believe in the forensic audit of the terrain. The mountain is always calculating. The question is, are you part of the equation? Stay safe. Stay found. This has been the Darkest Files TV.
Welcome to a forensic audit of the impossible. We are entering the coordinates of Paradoxical, the mountain of the dead. This is not a ghost story. This is a cold, calculated analysis of the absolute zero of logic. The field logic. In the wilderness, survival is a mathematical equation. But in February 1959, for 9 elite Soviet hikers, the variables simply stopped making sense. They were trained, they were strong, and they were led by Dyatlov. Yet, they fled their only protection in 30 degrees Celsius, cutting their tent open from the inside. Why did the laws of self-preservation vanish? Today, we audit the ghost frequency and the cold fire. Let us reconstruct the timeline. January 23rd, 1959. 10 hikers depart from Vijay. 1 returns due to health issues. 9 continue into the Ural Mountains. We examine the final diary entries. They were laughing, singing, and documenting a standard expedition. The field logic. The transition from standard to lethal occurred at the 417th frame of their existence. On February 1st, they pitched their tent on the slope of Paradoxical. This was their first tactical error, or perhaps their last choice. At approximately 9:30 p.m., something triggered a total biological shutdown. There was no struggle, no external predator, only a sudden, frantic escape into a pitch-black blizzard. They left behind their boots, their coats, and their logic. We now audit the bodies found in the snow. This is the absolute zero of biology. Subject 1 and 2, found under a cedar tree, nearly naked. Their hands were shredded, not by an enemy, but by their own desperate attempt to climb a frozen tree. Subject 3, 4 and 5, found in a line, crawling back to the tent. They died in the posture of hope, reaching for a shelter they would never touch. Subject 6, 7, 8 and 9. This is where the physics truly fails. Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov suffered internal pressure trauma. Their ribs were crushed as if by a high-speed car crash, yet there was no external bruising. The field logic. This is pressure termination. To crush a human ribcage without breaking the skin requires a high-energy, uniform force. It is as if the mountain itself decided to compress the air around them until their internal structures collapsed. Why did they run? We analyze the topography of Paradoxical. The dome-shaped peak creates a Kármán vortex street. When the wind hits this specific geometry, it generates infrasound at 19 Hz. The field logic. This is the ghost frequency. The human ear cannot hear 19 Hz, but the human eye and brain are tuned to it. 19 Hz is the resonant frequency of the human eyeball. It causes blurred vision and triggers the amygdala, the brain's fear center. Imagine a sound so low you can't hear it with your ears, but you feel it in your bones as a scream of pure terror. It's like a silent alarm that tells your brain the world is ending. The wind didn't just howl. It vibrated their very souls until they chose to die in the cold rather than stay in that sound. Finally, we audit the paradoxical undressing. Why were they found in their underwear? The field logic. This is a failure of the hypothalamus, the brain's thermostat. In the final stage of hypothermia, the blood vessels that were constricted to save the core suddenly burst open. This is called vasodilation. We call it the cold fire. At the very edge of death, your brain makes a fatal mistake. It tells your body you are burning alive in an oven. In a state of total madness, you strip off your clothes to escape the heat, only to embrace the 30 degrees Celsius air that freezes you solid in minutes. It is nature's most cruel magic trick. Recent Swiss simulations suggest a slab avalanche, a silent slide of snow that pinned them in their sleep. But does a slab of snow explain the radiation found on their clothes? Does it explain the orange spheres witnessed in the sky that night? The field logic. The data is vast, but the conclusion is singular. The mountain is indifferent to your expertise. Whether it was a secret weapon, a frequency of madness, or a silent slide of snow, Paradoxical claimed its due. Dyatlov team didn't just disappear. They were audited by the wilderness and found wanting. Stay safe. Stay found. This is a forensic audit by the Darkest Files TV.
Welcome to a forensic audit of the impossible. In January 1974, a young photographer named Charles McCullar entered Crater Lake National Park. He wasn't just a visitor, he was an intruder into a scent void. The field logic. Survival is a calculation of calories versus environmental resistance. But at Crater Lake, the variables are corrupted. Charles disappeared into a wall of white that dropped 100 inches of snow in less than 72 hours. He didn't just go missing. His very presence was deleted by the terrain. Let us reconstruct the final 7 days. January 30th. The temperature drops to 20 degrees. Charles is last seen by a park ranger, carrying only his camera and a light pack. The field logic. To walk into a 100-inch snowstorm is a biological error, but the SAR logs reveal something more chilling. Search dogs, highly trained bloodhounds, suddenly stopped at a specific coordinate. Their tracking ability was terminated. We analyzed the atmospheric pressure and molecular settling rates. Scent concentration dropped to absolute zero. It wasn't that he was gone, it was as if his existence had no molecular footprint left for the dogs to find. 1 year later, hikers found the remains, but what they found violates every law of forensics. Charles's jeans were found unzipped, belt undone, lying flat on a log. Inside the pants were his skeletal remains. The field logic. This is paradoxical liquefaction. His feet were still in his socks, and his socks were still inside his boots. But his tibia and fibula, his lower leg bones, were found 12 miles away at the bottom of a steep ravine. Imagine a man melting out of his clothes like ice in the sun. His boots and socks stayed together, but his bones were plucked out and thrown 12 miles away as if by a giant, invisible hand. The mountain didn't just kill him, it disassembled him like a piece of clockwork. How does a skeletal structure travel 12 miles without disturbing the clothing it was wrapped in? We audit the pressure termination theory. At Crater Lake, the transition from a living organism to a skeletonized remain occurs at a rate that defies local biology. Scavengers cannot explain the 12-mile displacement. We are witnessing a spatio-temporal disruption. The terrain claimed his logic before it claimed his life. Charles McCullar went to take a picture of the mountain, but the mountain performed an audit of his soul and found it wanting. The data is impossible, yet the evidence remains. The absolute zero of logic still haunts Crater Lake. Whether it's the 90 flashes in Panama or the melting man of Oregon, the wilderness is always calculating. Stay safe. Stay found. This has been a forensic audit by the Darkest Files TV. We have audited the data. From the digital screams of the tropics to the cold fire of the frozen north, the pattern is undeniable. The wilderness does not hate you. It is simply indifferent to your logic. Whether it's a failure of the hypothalamus, the vibration of 19 hertz, or a scent void that deletes your very existence. Nature is always calculating its next move. Charles, Chris, Lisanne, and the Dyatlov 9. They weren't just victims. They were variables in an equation we are still trying to solve. The files are closed, but the mountain remains open. Stay vigilant. The field logic suggests that the next audit could happen anywhere the air gets thin and the silence gets loud. Stay safe, stay found. This has been a Forensic Audit by the Darkest Files TV.